That is starting.
Yeah, introduce you or you know more people. But we're just gonna come back together, ladies, if that's okay. And make the start from the rest of this morning. And I'm sure Michael doesn't need any introductions, but as you know, this is Michael McClelland from our flexible learning resource, and we've had the privilege of working with Michael on NVR from the very beginning. Yeah, so Michael's been a parent group facilitator, delivered training, and he's an absolute asset. So I was delighted when he agreed to come on today. So that's why he's been recorded.
Some intro, I like that. So I think I know most people. But if you don't know me, I work in flexible learning resource, used to be the PT in there. And like Kira was saying, I've been involved in NVR for maybe 5 years before lockdown, way back. So Kira had asked if I could come along and speak just about how we use NVR with our children who are kind of displaying really like real dysregulation. Although I'm looking around and there's loads of people who are experiencing the same, but lots of the less behaviours, type behaviours, and how we kind of push back the NVR kind of journey to staff going on. Just so give a couple of examples of that, and then we thought just a wee bit of time to just ask questions. That might not be able to answer it, but time a bit. So this is level 2.
Yep.
Right. So that's good. So loads of training. So kind of my journey was kind of stepped up as time went on. So we went on the first training for level 1, and I kind of started to integrate that into my practice. At that point, I suppose we did think, and then by level 2, it all started, I think, making much more sense. That I think the level 2 made a big difference to, right, I can see how this will apply in a classroom or in our setting across the piece, how it can apply to staff and things. I think the first thing that I looked at was, instead of jumping in too quickly and trying to use it, trying to hold back my enthusiasm a wee bit, like this is really good. How do we actually want to use it? Where does it fit in? So my first step that we looked at was, how does it fit in with current practice? Trying not to throw anything out that's already working. And what we found is that actually it synced up really well with loads of the things that we're doing. There's a lot of crossover there, things like trauma-informed kind of approaches, nurturing approaches, RNRA. There's all things that we were already involved in on a journey. And we thought, actually, this isn't something that sits separate. It can really integrate into what we're doing. And even things like rights, there's loads of crossover. Started to kind of unpick that. And then to try and be quite strategic with it, we looked at school improvement plan and said, what are our priorities? How can we properly give some time over doing this so that we're giving it the focus and we're giving it the weight and we're showing the importance to staff. So that was kind of a first couple of steps. And then I suppose in terms of our early impact, the first thing that really jumped out at me in terms of impact in my daily practice was the stuff against kind of shield against shame. So that really resonated with us, and I think it maybe was the pupils that we were working at the time. So kind of example, that's with a primary 7 girl at the time who actually some of us have all worked with. And what we used to see was she would be really escalated quickly, but as soon as we tried to engage in any kind of, not even as far as like a restorative conversation, but just any conversation around that, it would really, things would erupt really quickly. And when we looked at the shield against shame stuff, that really resonated. So, right, these are the things she's doing. She's lying about it. She's blaming other people. She's doing all of that, deflecting away. And the levels of anger were just like, didn't match up with what happened. It was this sort of real mismatch. And we started to think, right, we maybe need to soften our approach here. We need to soften the edges of how we're having this conversation. And it's a sort of tricky one because you have to have the conversation, but when pupils really not in a place to do it, so you then think, well, we'll step back and do it camera. But with this wee girl, it could last 2 days. You're trying to have a fresh start the next day, so you've got this whole kind of dilemma. But what we found was that by softening the edges, so first thing was the time. So how do we step away from that time? How do we get in with this sort of relational thing, get the relationship back in line before we try and have any difficult conversation? Give time to really fully settle down. We had to be really understanding that some of what was happening was about her perception of threat in this situation. She had kind of full profile of having a lot of trauma and was quite kind of hypervigilant and very attuned and aware of other people's feelings, but also any possible threat or any possible sort of challenge to hurting the thing. So that was really coming out. So we had to say, well, conversation isn't just a difficult conversation. It isn't that she's just trying to avoid getting her out, or she doesn't want, or she's trying to deflect away. It's actually threatening to her and her kind of mind. It's really sort of sparking these fight and flight responses. And so the more we could be aware of that every time we tried to have the conversation, that's a big difference. And then once I was aware of that, it was then sort of like filtering that out to staff. And I suppose that's the sort of next bit that really had the impact. It was a shared language. Once we had, a few of us had done it, the RNVR training, we started to try and use these same sort of language, and that made a big difference. So a lot of the RNVR language is sort of focuses on the solution and focuses on the real problem, but also it's very positive. When you're talking about this is a response to shame, it's not talking about the behaviour in a really negative way, it's really positive and with a sort of reason behind it. And understanding actually these behaviours were predictable, so they could then be planned for quite easily. We knew anytime we went to have this conversation with the wee girl, she was likely to behave in these ways. And if she was going to behave in these ways, how were we going to respond to those things? It was going to do two things. It was going to push back against it, resist the behaviour, try and move things along and have the bit of restoration, but also protect our relationship and sort of help her and be a kind of nurturing way of doing that. So it's kind of tricky. I suppose the next thing I was going to talk about was resistance. So so one of the big things that we started to feel in the base was, so we were getting really big behaviours. We'd be getting violence, we'd be getting rooms getting wrecked, swearing, and all like really kind of real big escalated behaviours, and staff would want to push back against that. So there'd be swearing with that, and staff would start to push back, and we were getting a bit of symmetrical escalation, but not maybe the way you see it with parents, where it's like parents booming, but there was a little bit of that we were feeding into it because we were pushing back. But there was an expectation of a pushback had to result in a change to the behaviour. And this was a big change and a sort of shift in our thinking. So looking at resisting behaviour, but without the expectation that the behaviour would change, and that the success criteria in that sort of interaction with the pupil wasn't that the behaviour would arise, we would do something, and the behaviour would stop its tracks, and then we would move along. That actually our job was to resist the behaviour and to sort of hold the line a wee bit in a sort of kind of measured and calm and sensible, fair way. But that the child would walk all over the line, but like they would cross it anyway. But the idea was that we put up resistance. We did that consistently, and that was quite tricky for staff to get, because they would feel like they, as the adult, they had to get a result, and there is that pressure on staff quite often, and there's pressure on parents as well. Behaviour arises, they need to do something to stop it, and we try to sort of get away from that, and it really helped. So it allowed staff to be calmer in the moment and just to know what they were doing and know that they're putting the resistance up, and then they were maybe going to walk away. Like it's a sort of step process to that, and that the thing that was going to change the behaviour was the strategic plan and the push from the whole staff, and it was all of these steps that were going to put, not the sort of thing right in the moment. So an example of that, and this is a kind of smaller example, that isn't a massive escalated behaviour, but it sort of led to quite escalated behaviour. With a pupil who would refuse to go out breaking lunchtime. pretty consistently. He'd get to break time, say, right, time to go out, get snack, get jacket, do the whole thing. And he just refused to go out. But his refusal wasn't just, I'm not going, it would be, I'm not going, and then open and step things up. So he would tend to start with swearing and then a bit of shouting and more and more escalate, damage the property, eventually hands on staff. But it was repeated behaviour that was happening pretty consistently. And there was something in the background there. I think he was anxious now. He wasn't sure, and he had some bad experiences in his previous school, like break things being really challenging for him. Didn't really have a friendship group, wasn't sure what to do when he went out. So there's a whole lot of things in the background, but we had to decide what we're doing this. We wanted to get from the point where he was staying in and not accessing those social experiences, and he wasn't able to be in and be appropriate and safe either. It wasn't like, oh, that's fine, you can just sit in and do it. He then didn't know what to do in the room and things would escalate. So we had to try and push back. So we decided to use the rule of one and some autopilot statements. And really, really simple. We just said, so we decided we're going to say it once, what's the expectation? So, and whoever the adult is that's leading that's going to do that. So we get to break time, we get to lunchtime. Say, right, everyone, jacket, snack, time for lunch, let's go over the line up, whatever we're doing. But we would then know that he was going to react in a certain way, going to refuse to do it. And we had an autopilot statement that everyone was to use similar language. And it was around the lines of, well, it's really good to get out and get some fresh air and it's fun to get food. And that was it, that was our resistance. And then the adult would walk away. And what happened initially was the exact same stuff. So we'd resisted it, he refused to go out. And initially sort of escalated a couple of times, but there wasn't additional pushback from us. So once he'd refused to go out and he'd given that autopilot statement, we were then away and sort of left to do. And then we started to put some things in, or you can go and play with sand, or you can go. So we gave him some options to do. And what we found is the first thing that happened quite quickly was the escalation is reduced. Still wasn't going out the door, wasn't going to go out. His viewpoint hadn't changed. But we weren't locking horns with him, we were trying to force the thing to happen. And in the background, we then started to look at the friendship groups and trying to sort of unpick that anxiety around being out. Things like just looking out the window and saying, oh, that looks fun, and just really, really slowly building that. But you get a consistent message every break, every lunch from all the adults, whoever was in front of them. It's a very, very consistent message. And it was tricky because staff didn't see a change initially, other than the lack of escalation. And that wasn't, sometimes it did escalate, sometimes it didn't, but there was a reduction. You can step back and look at it. But the time that took was massive. I thought over weeks and then into months before he was actually able to start going out. But it did work. And what we found was the breaks and lunches where we were having that blocking horns and trying to force the thing to happen, relationships were starting to fray and chip away. And it was then after break he still escalated and raging, and he's coming into the class and he's really angry with the eyes and speak to him or whoever, the teacher, and all of that reduced. So we had lots of kind of good relational stuff, good kind of strength in relationships. And I think he felt that he was being listened to a bit more and felt that he was being, but we had held a line as well. The expectation was still there, but without having to force it. And slowly what happened is he started buying into it, started just coming out. And it's just not an issue now. And we know it's sort of in the back burner. Anytime that happens with them again, we just go back to the same thing and sort of knows this is the same. It's not straight. So that's made a kind of big difference to him. I suppose the other thing that's really helped with, and I know we've spoken about adult presence, and I think that's absolutely massive. It's massive at home, but massive in schools, because sort of quite simply, but the calmer we can be and the more strategic and planned and non-reactive to the behaviour and not sort of easily swayed and holding the line, all that stuff really raises our presence. And in this case, it worked for the staff because we weren't getting in, we weren't getting drawn into an argument. We weren't getting really good at that, drawing you into the sort of reasons why, we weren't getting into any of that. We were just holding the line really calmly. And even if he escalated, staying really calm and walking away, and we were doing all this. And sort of our presence really, sort of collective adult presence really kind of was rising through that. So, in terms of our current use of NVR, we've used it in a few ways. We've used it in pushing back against violence. Violence isn't probably the best word, but sort of that now. It's a really tricky one because sort of some of that can be violence that's top end of an escalation. So it's not that we are just accepting it and that it's okay, but I think there's a difference between quite targeted violence that maybe a pupil or staff and a child in real distress, and it's sort of a result of that coming out of closure about safe. So it's allowed us to differentiate that. We've used it against violence, but at the moment what we're pushing back against is a real increase in swearing and abuse language. It's like right top end extremities of swearing and language and stuff that's impacting on mainstream pupils and younger pupils and ways and impacting relationships. And again, it's allowing us to to be really planned with that rather than reaction to this increase in the language. To step back from it, be a wee bit calmer and more measured and strategic to how we're pushing that. And again, it's allowing us to differentiate between some of our children swearing and it's more attached to their stress levels and anxiety, and it's more of a sort of indicator of where they're at and that they need an extra level of support. And it allows us to push back about that in a different way. And so the behaviour that's where it's kind of connected to the dysregulation or heightened of distress, then pushing back a certain way, it's quite targeted swearing, and there's an element of control in it for pushing back a certain way, and everybody's doing the same thing, so that can help. But what we're doing is, as well as pushing back, we're really upping the relational gestures and really trying to strengthen relationships and be quite targeted with that, trying to be quite open as a staff and say, look at our attunement across the base. Who are we not connecting with in terms of childhood we maybe not know as well, who's that are kind of clash with, and that's the child unit going straight on the relational gesture. So I've got one pupil at the moment who every time we're in a room, I'm the bad guy at the moment, and there's just no connection there. And trying to be really honest with that, I'm not spending enough time with them, and I've not been putting out the relationship in the way that probably could have. And probably his perception now is that every time he sees me, I'm there to kind of try and he's usually escalated when I get called, so he sort of associates that. So what we're trying to do is really target these certain children with relational gestures and really, really offer out the relationship. And the more we push back against the behaviour, the more we offer out the relationship so that we can do anything with them. Right. There's a whistle stop tour. Any questions about, probably easier questions about just like how you're using it or how we used it?
I really like the examples from it's always trying to take what we're reading and what it's actually going to be like in practice. So I'm quite taken with the idea of the resisting isn't necessarily to immediate change. Because that's quite a mindset shift, because staff people who's in charge here kind of thing, because it makes it still look like the child is in charge, or perhaps but if it's with a plan, get to a change in behaviour eventually. Is that what you meant? So when you're saying resist, like what does it actually mean resist? Does it just say you're not accepting it, or does it put a sanction in place, or so that they know you mean it, you know you're in for 5 minutes or whatever every time you do it, or is it just the saying of it so they know?
Yeah, the reason that I really liked NVR in the first place was that it stepped away from consequential law, that whole kind of idea. And the reason I really liked that was because that never works with the children. And essentially, like if it did, they would never get to getting a new scope and a base. the schools are great at that. Schools are brilliant at, particularly the reward stuff. You know, really getting people engaged and involved, and for a whole load of reasons, which we could talk about all day. That just doesn't really hit, doesn't work, doesn't affect the behaviour at all. And actually, in a lot of ways, it makes it worse for some of our children because can't handle either the reward or the consequence. Consequence shoots all sorts of shame and all that, and they just push that against. And actually, the reward does the same thing. So there's absolutely no point where they're saying, so say they're swearing, like just for example, swearing, giving them a warning and then pushing it on a consequence. All that happens is it escalates. But what you can't do is just accommodate that behaviour because they can't handle the consequence. So there needs to be something for staff to do. But it's such a sort of like weak. It sounds so weak to say, just going to push back against. We're just going to say that's not acceptable. And then it's like, right, and then what? Well, there isn't an then what. It's just that's not acceptable. That's just what it is. And then because the thing that affects that behaviour is all the work that goes on in the back. So like, why are they getting escalated? Why are they swearing? Why are they feeling the need to do all that stuff? And then start chipping away all of that in the background. But what happens for staff is there's a lot of real positives for staff because they don't get into a battle. They don't feel the need to win. There isn't a win there. They're just resisting. That's it. And they say less because it's quite flattened. I'm going to say this, and then here's my. Particularly if you're using like a pilot statement, or say this, then this, and there's less language, so there's less back and forward, and it sort of tends to reduce escalation. And because staff know that they're not trying to get the behaviour to change, it allows them to be calmer and less stressed and such. So that all these sort of like additional things, the relationships protected when the child particularly escalates. That's the point where you really need to. I think people sometimes forget that when a child's at a sort of towards their peak of escalation, our job isn't to change that behaviour. Our job is to calm the situation down and to protect your relationship. You need to be there with it. Because they're past it. All the de-escalation stuff comes earlier. All the trying to deflect away and use humour and all that stuff can happen earlier on. But once they've got to a point, they're kind of just making things safe and keep them with them, and then trying to get them.
I'm just trying to get the practice. What happened yesterday, you know?
So it's different. So, like the girl I was talking about in the P7, you absolutely need to revisit it, but you need to be aware of it. It's not like re-traumatizing her, but kind of is. It sets things off again, and so there needs to be decisions made about. It's gone 2 days and we've not been able to have a conversation about that. Do we just move on from it, or do we want to make a point of we have to have a conversation, or does there need to be a conversation? Is it? Like how are we restoring that? We want a sorry. Is the sorry going to make any difference? Is that too shaming and too kind of like personal and too much to share? Who needs to do the restoration? Is it going to be the person who the thing was against? So it needs to be a lot of decisions in, but it's strategic. It's not. So for some of our pupils, we expect that they need to do something to fix it. So they might say sorry, or they might act in a way like they're going to do something nice for that person, or that they've made a mess of it, or whatever they're going to do. But it's not the same for all of our pupils, because some of our pupils can handle it and are at a different place to get to that point, and others will just know where they're moving. And that's part of the strategic plan. It's like at the moment, the restoration looks like this, and conversation at this point. And then you start to pull that back to our expectation of what they can maybe tolerate in terms of kind of fixing the situation, then increases as time goes on.
Just because we've not really mentioned it in the last 2 days we've been training, but it's absolutely right. It's that mindset shift. It's almost like that the success criteria is in the adult behaviour, not in the children's behaviour.
And that's the kind of thing that makes NVR a bit different. You've been successful as an adult in your NVR campaign if you have managed to keep your cool and kind of like and kind of like bring an escalation down and kind of like follow through the plan strategy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. We spoke about this in early parent groups where we weren't promising behavioural change in the child, but we were saying, like, if the parent will feel more able to deal with the situation and know, here's what I'm doing, here's my plan, and this is my strategy, and all that, like, they would be more in control of that. And almost the behavioural change is the kind of secondary bit. Once the behaviour of the adult changes and the relationship shift, not having get the behaviour. Kind of this, it's sort of the same idea in schools. It's just tricky because, like you're saying, that's such a slow process. But there isn't a quick process to change these bigger behaviours. Particularly the environment tackling, but you're not just scooping up all the weak stuff and hoping that affects the bigger ones.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think just a update on that because it's quite interesting. So that was 2019. She transitioned into a secondary in Lancashire. So she was looked after. She had a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
Had been through several placements, etc. Was in a children's school, so she's probably one of the most vulnerable children having more authority. So she went to a secondary in Lancashire, did a great job with her. The trauma that was within the family and extended circumstances. And then as a teenager, she found that very hard. She started getting into issues in the community. And so she went into a specialist residential placement. And she is now back out of that. And is placed out of authority. But I suppose it was still confidential, probably didn't be a month's time. But for me, the really interesting thing is that through the work that Michael did both within the base and the mainstream school, relationships remained intact. And as you remember right at the very beginning of this, I mentioned about the adopted child, but actually did say the adopted placement relationships. So, so this young person is still going through all sorts of ups and downs, but fascinatingly, she was home for some contact in the family community, and she chose to go to the school pet of her mainstream primary school, and next with every single one of the members of staff, told them all about how she was getting on, very selective about what she told them, but focused on positives, was able to connect with her personality. Now, I've seen other young people who become completely lost in the system, lose a sense of who they are, and get very caught up in the story around who they are. I think I've heard some people talk about that. And sometimes that narrative around who they are is just so detrimental. And she claimed those relationships. She claimed that old sense of who she was, which was quite a good, positive relationship. And that was just in the last couple of weeks now. She is in a situation, if you looked at it from the outside, it's incredibly tricky. Education is still struggling very much with her. But she has a kind of sense of self, and she has those relationships. And what we're doing now is that we're linking up the mainstream primary 7 teacher with some of the reviews, which are out of authority, and just that relationship and just keeping that relationship going. So I think, and one other thing I wrote down that I don't think we touched on yet is the impact of rewards on some children, which I think is really interesting. So this would probably be not very many children, but for some children it is actually quite shaming to reward them. You have to be aware of that. Just for some children, they don't deserve it. So we talk a lot about the shield of shame and focusing on the negative, the behaviour. Don't really talk about focusing on the fact that it can be quite upsetting for some children to be rewarded. So all I would say is, obviously I'm a big user, a big believer and everything like that, but I get so excited when it begins to work. Find myself rewarding kids. I'm not really, but I am, because I'm just dead delighted. The pressure that I'm putting on that child and that family, maybe even the school and the teacher, the expectations, the demands, they're kind of hidden, but they're there too. So it is this idea of, as well as resisting consistently, no matter whether the child walks all over that line, which I thought was a really good way of putting it, you're also keeping the relational gestures as consistent as you can and not necessarily upping them when there's success. And I think that is counterintuitive, but actually it's really quite important, because it comes and it goes, and you're in this for a marathon, not a sprint for a lot of these things. So it will have really good points, it might have down points. Do you know what? You're worth it no matter what happens, ups and downs. And at the end of the day, it's the focus on the well-being. Who am I? And that sense of being able to enter the world as a worthwhile person, not depending on the story around me, things that happens to me.
You're finding that more and more. The profile of the children that you've come up over the last, say for the last 3 years, we really shifted. And there's an awful lot more trauma, like really deep rooted and stuff that's still going on. And what we're finding more and more is as the adults is really level across the day, and it can look a bit strange because there'll be a real escalation, like real behaviour that's just not appropriate, might be like hitting them type thing. And we sort of don't move too far from our baseline. We need to show that we're not very happy about our behaviour and push back. It's like a tiny shift and almost doesn't match the behaviour. But if we matched it, we'd be like this all day. And that's really keep using the word threatening, but it kind of is. For the child who's experienced a lot of trauma, they don't need this. And on the other end of it, they don't like the same, don't need the massive reward of the thought. Like, because they can't deal with it, they just need a wee shift this way. So kind of we stay in here and they jump about all over the place up and down the extremes. They kind of hope you pull them down and leave it with you. And that's true. Parents can struggle with that as well, and teachers can struggle, especially if they're big personalities. They can go either way and kind of want a more calm, measured level.
I would say keep it bland. I had a plan that was more realistic. I don't know, I'm not a clinician, it looked to me like a sort of DA type of thing, demand or anything like that. We did not like the kind of teacher who,
Yeah.
so just every March morning, you know, everyone was just like, and
They're
that
also really attuned to small change. It's more than we are.
yeah.
They're attuned to shifts and they know if they're not right. Yeah, I've had some really interesting moments where the level of attunement these children have to your emotions is absolutely massive. It makes you think. So little shifts, as much as it seems quite blunt, as those little shifts, they're picking them up very often. And if we go too much like this, it's too much.
I feel like I do this because to actually you need to get a fight a couple of classes, be consistent highly. What would be the kind of main points you would say to have one and then say, and then we come back and revisit them? Do we start with like the shared language first?
First of all,
I think
because I feel we need to look at everything, but I'm trying to get my head in.
start.
Yeah. And
It
again,
almost depends what's happening.
I feel it needs to be consistent, like taking fashion.
We've done a lot about language and consistency. I suppose what we want to do is support staff to see where NVR fits with a lot of the RNVR stuff. So and what language advice.
And I think it would really help staff as well. Get their thoughts together.
I think I don't know if it depends on the staff or whatever our staff and the base we put 2 ASNs to teach we work with them generally, and it's been fairly consistent with bits of kind of certain staff leaving in them, but generally it's it. And we've all chosen to work in a specific bit of education in the sense, and trying to consistency across just that small number of staff who've all got quite a shared sort of vision of what they want and expectation and training and all that. It's still really difficult. I suppose consistency, depends how you think in terms of consistency. That's not everybody's approach being exactly the same all the time in the language the same all the time. It's sort of stepping back from that, but pulling in the same direction. And so that things like things that made a difference for us were talking about presence and how your presence can really diminish if you're too reactive to the behaviour in front of you. And the harder you push to change the behaviour, actually, your presence is just dropping. It's not really, you're not getting anywhere, and you're probably just escalating. So that's been quite big in terms of us pulling into more of a shared approach. And the thing about resisting, but not trying necessarily to change the behaviour in the moment. And then strategically, how are we planning? What are we pushing back against? Into everything, into what was played. So how are we being focused? That's the stuff that's made a difference. And shared language is big.
Exactly, that's exactly it, because that's even changed my mindset really, because I've broken down the language at first, but actually it's what's going on with the behaviour. Yeah.
I suppose then thinking about it as a whole school approach, there is a structure around that in terms of NVR and thinking about, well, we need to look at the connection for correction and the resist or the persist. It's the persist elements first, which is your de-escalation strategies and all of that.
So the relational stuff.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard sell at times, because if you speak to staff that are generally worried about, and I think like across education, that's the sense I get when I go to school. Everybody's really worried about the way behaviours go. Plus, and well, that's actually true, but that's how you feel. And the things that like up here and we haven't went before. So it's quite a hard sell to say that the beginning of the solution to that is that you're really nice and you operate the relationship. That's a bit like, feels a bit, just soft and a bit weak. But if there's a plan for this is the beginning of it, because without that can't get to this part, then sort of steps up. And it's sharing the plan a wee bit as well. That helped with our staff. Like, but actually, have to say they're massive. But and it's not just NPR as well. It's like a whole plan. But I think share the vision and the time scales are all that kind of help. So
Most likely, just because obviously there's the secondary school that's its own. It says because you're meeting a number of staff over the course of the day, so its consistency is multiplied. You're going to get a degree when you've got that. We are going to try and do it as a whole school. And yeah, that's a challenge. But I've written down a lot when you were saying them. It's a lot that I put away and discussed. But it's just about it and in my head how it would work with the shared language, etc. around a young person. It's getting the staff together enough. And it's great to have that once, and get this, we'll do this young person, but I wouldn't be able to do that with the staff that they need on a regular basis. But it's just that I've taken away so much. I've written down Albert present, the consequence equals shame. And it was amazing what you said, because there was a boy who came in to do an industry, who was a former pupil, his care experience. And when he was talking about consequences, he says, these young people in front of you already have the consequence. He says, they know more about consequences than anybody, than anybody else. So you're saying there has to be a consequence. They already have it. They'll take away the consequence, and that's the consequences for shame, which I've really taken away from that. So thank you very much. That wrote this.
I think that's the things I've been thinking as well. These are for them people who feel the need to kind of put together conflict, who need to get out of passion, like go wonder. That's their way of being able to cope with a situation. We've got a lot of staff who can't let that happen. Maybe kind of a good staff from as well, is that this kind of the same relational?
yeah, so we've got at the moment as well. So your behaviour shifted a wee bit. Used to take himself at class. Lots of anxiety around work and like the actual hope and now learning. And then things say health and wellbeing plan. Trying to avoid calling it a job, calling it and just sees right through it now. So there's a whole load of stuff there, or there's a lot of relationships who have a bit of a disagreement and then go out. We used to go out and wander, we tended to go to the same place. And the most they would ever really do is pull some more just play down and fix it with their own. So that was sort of fine, and everybody was, so he needs the walk, it didn't last long, and then he needs to do better. And we were trying to direct him towards it, there's a safe space. You can walk this route as long as you know where you're going, and trying to like put some boundary safety around it. But he's now up to when he goes, he started meeting like other staff and he's pushing them, or he's hitting out, or he's taking himself out of school grounds, or sort of nothing. And we're having to now follow him a lot more closely to keep things safe. But he really, really hates that. So the walk now doesn't calm him, it sort of spirals things up. And it's trying to, like, so there's the one hand of it's the understanding of why he needs it. So he needs it out. So how do we soften those triggers in class, the need for going out and how do we work against that? But that's like slow steps, so that he's less likely to go out, and continue to encourage the positive, like you can go to this place from one day and leave, you could go in there. But it's steps, it's like having a step. So first thing we're doing, with him just now, it's the first thing we're doing is we're going to start sort of increasing the distance that we follow him from, just like really, but like small amounts you need to be right here. So at the moment we're like right on him because he is hitting out. And there's trying to share that understanding of what we're doing with the rest of the staff because everyone can impact it. And then so our staff know what the step is. The first thing is we're going to go a wee bit of a distance and try to really positive him around. We're giving him a bit of trust and knowing more. We're trying to get him back to doing it properly. And then we'll do this thing. So it's stepping it as time goes on. I think the more you can share what's the reason behind it, why is he doing it? And generally, you can get caught up a wee bit, especially if you're right in the midst of it, with that behaviour not okay. It's like, let's dig a wee bit deeper and see why it's. That doesn't mean you're saying it's okay, it's just saying here's where maybe it's come from. Yeah.
And whatever reason and why are there and what this says it's tricky to remember. If the teacher then was like, okay, well, you put this, you're the deputy, I'm not. Then they have to keep on trying to actually relationship.
There's a strange sort of disconnect sometimes. This is a thing found passing on to mainstream staff more than staff basis. Staff basis sort of immersed in the children's lives, everything about it, you know, the background. There's a different understanding. But like one of our boys was spitting a lot. And actually the spitting is not to do with spit to try. There's a bit of it spit at people that's sort of aside, that was when he was really escalated. They tended to spit quite a lot, and we definitely started to get sensitive connected to stress levels. The more he was sort of stressed about something, that's what's happening. But there was a real pushback from staff because he's wondering spitting people windows and forward, particularly close to COVID. But back after that, it's full drama. But we at no point did we push back against the spitting with him. We didn't say you can't spit. You know, for COVID there's nothing of that because actually what we need to do is feel safe, secure. Like bring the stress levels down, and then what happened was spit would reduce. So sometimes
What you describe it as baskets.
yeah.
So we talked about this a lot. Sometimes the most obvious thing for the small basket isn't the right thing at all. It's what is actually going to change. So that's really important.
Comes back to that unmet need.
Yeah.
What ways can you use other strategies to deal with rather than making it more of a target, something making it the focus of more attention? Something struck me, you said a calm, measured, strategic approach, but it's like often we're heightened and looking for immediate reactive solutions, crisis management kind of type stuff, you know, and a lot of us are in that kind of field of it. And actually is that kind of shift in understanding small changes. Actually, we need to be calm to allow our thinking brain to then have a shared plan and time to think, and that is the hard thing at the minute.
Yeah. I used to when I viewed the de-escalation training years ago, talk about like fake it till you make it. It was just like kid on your cam. And actually I don't really you need to you can't, but there's a real tangible difference between actually being calm in the moment and kidding on you. And for the children that are heightened in that way and really like just tuned to you, they'll know if you're not, even if you're kidding on you. Give off too many signals, you can't pay for a lot of that. So some of the work that this isn't strictly NVR, I suppose it is in a way that some of the work that we've had to do is around staff regulation. What are you doing so that when because these things happen, sometimes it's not predicted when something just comes out, but generally children's behaviour that we're talking about is repeated and tends to be similar triggers and similar sort of stressors around it. So kind of see it coming. Because we've got children at lunchtimes, and as much as we put things in place, lunchtime will be a bit too long and there's the stress of the social stuff and not go. So I actually shouldn't really be surprised with it very often. Maybe what it looks like is surprising because they do something unusual, but it's come from the same place. So it's trying to be, and the more you can have a plan around it, the easier. I think for our staff, one of the things that brought their own sort of helped them to regulate stay camp was knowing that there was a plan around it and an expectation. They put too much of a high expectation themselves because they were feeling like back to that, you need to win in this, you need to get the behavior stop. That can really reduce your anxiety and your stress around it. But I know that that's hard with other people looking on as well. But what's my first job is to stay calm and protect the relationship and keep my presence and all that. And actually, about the first 3 or 4 priorities in the interaction with somebody that's escalated has nothing to do with anything really change behaviour. It's about that thing. Like they go up and you go down.
These things is really make things. For the staff to stay regulated, there's obviously an element of self-care, which we talked to them about, but thinking about a busy school day, there's also a lot about unite. So if you're the one who's getting escalated, you need to get a pal in who's not as escalated. Also looking around the room and thinking how passionate you are. If you are attuned to the child, it's very, very hard for you to stay calm if they're not calm. Or very empathic. And sometimes actually not being as attuned helps, but that feels counterintuitive. So again, that's where Unite really works, where you bring somebody else in. I'm actually also reflecting sometimes people need, this is a horrible word, an emotional dump. And I think that's when our emotional load becomes so strong, is when people like us, particularly psychologists, go in and tell you this stuff, and it feels like it's almost shutting down your ability to say, do you know what, I'm up with this, and I've had enough. And so within the parameters of this is a safe space, this is Michael, he understands, and the point of this will be to then take a deep breath, go back out and start again. I think we have to make people feel safe to do that, but as long as they understand. I think if we start to just pretend, you're right, if we start to fake it, that's when the emotional load becomes too much and the block of fear comes up. I also think, when I think about foster carers, we worked in foster care at the beginning. Sometimes when they offloaded to the social worker, the next step was, right, let's move the child on. And that wasn't always what, there was sometimes a lever there to say, right, I've heard you, what do you want to do now? And not sort of trying to make it okay for people. And again, because people are in senior management posts here, I think that is sometimes we just want to take away the pain from our staff. Actually being able to hear the pain and then say, right, now what? Can we make this better? How can we fix this? How can we? I don't know if that's something you also think.
Yeah, I had a really good manager years ago. Who, I think it's before I started on basis, and he was great at knowing when I would just need to run about how the day and when actually it was going for something to happen in the change.
Yeah.
And I think something staff need that. It just need to be like the same stuff. We talk about it's not the time to make a decision plan. We've been talking about this an awful lot. It's you have a lot of going out debates, so out parks and climbing, fishing. And there's all these things, and it looks a wee bit from the outside, it's a bit of a volley about doing that, but massively part of the support plan and really need it. Because part of the support plan, if they're not behaving in the way up to that, should they go out? So this is a real thing, and where we've landed with it is a plan support that's like therapeutic type support that they need. It's already planned. The only thing that should stop them really going out is if they're not going to be safe enough to go out. It's safe. It's not about deserving or So you're looking at how's the behaviour led up to all that. But what we're having to really try hard to do is not make decisions when we're up here as well. And that happens sometimes. We'll go, I'm not going back in academy, and then go, like, what do I do now? They step back from that. So my presence is there because I just don't think I'm banned. Or do I see it through, which is there's a tendency to do, but then it's not very fair and great in terms of support. So talking to parents about planning, but shouldn't happen in your fear, it's nice, which is the strategic calm measure stuff. That's the, but you don't always, like, you can't always stay calm in the moment. And it's trying to judge it, you don't get it right. One time, like I said, and also there's things that sort of go against that. We are saying stay like this and sort of stay in that kind of level. There's also sometimes where you match the energy. It's not so much the emotional bit, you match the energy and then bring it down. That's a real kind of co-regulation thing. But that's planned. It's not just like you think, I know this child and I know it's likely to work and all that. So hard. So hard.
That's where it's really fine to get like, I'll speak to different parents. Our parents come around and leave me. Maybe they stay in the corner and we get everything in that school and so last time you taking them up to Aldi's and doing ice creams, yeah, you know, you stand there giving it this, doing that, and they're like, yeah. And it was so hard.
Questions and we spoke a lot about this exploration gesture, and I like the idea you spoke about how you tell your staff of what grounds and like a true manner of making a video and a person to go away with. I think that would be a really great start for us. What kind of things people can do? So I know you're always spoken to people saying like automatically go to buying them and bringing them in things and doing stuff, isolation gestures. What kind of things your staff can do in it?
So small as possible again.
Okay.
And actually in some of our cases it's needed to be a bit of an element of block here.
Okay.
And understandably between real targeted sort of escalation by actually lots of violence towards one person without the way to try and get. So it's been really, really small. So beginning with just like giving over time was the first bit for us. Like, and it might be something that we're going to play a game for, but it's the offer of it. It's not even the fact that it happens. So like to do this, being really mindful of the way, because so what I was finding is we had certain staff who were speaking less to the other, and it's hard to be aware of that. So sort of getting patterns what they're doing. So they would tend to sit closer to certain children because they knew there'd be a nice connection. They'd be talking at the breakfast table and they wouldn't include that person, but they weren't meaning to do it. And just having that thought of, I'm going to make sure I include that person and offer out time, and push back against that. It tends to just be shouting for that, you offer it, but it's the offer, and then just being really consistent, or not even consistent, persistent, that will keep going with it, keeping up and out. And then it might, and the other bit that's made a big, or it seems to have made quite an impact, is the keeping the person in mind when they're not there. That's big. So coming in and saying, and sharing, like much more sharing of like our own story, or what happened with your son, or like talking about your family and bringing us like remembering names and remembering dates and all that kind of stuff. That can, so just really small. Sometimes staff will, you're talking about a staff member with the child that they're really not connecting with, it does small as a whole. So feel and also there's that thing if you don't want to keep yourself out too much either, that's hard to put yourself out there, just going to keep rejecting it.
You use that approach with a member of staff who's getting quite feel targeted by one of our pupils that was constantly inspiring. I mean, there was an absolute element of blocked care. They had a really good relationship when she first came, and it just deteriorated because of the relentlessness of the. And I had said to her, "You need to start a relationship. He's missing the connection." And touch wood, it has improved, but just simply by spending 5 minutes playing a game, as simple as that, and that's long enough. But just consistently every day making that time. And it's the only thing actually that's helped reduce the violence. And initially she was like, we do this. I don't really want to be in a room with a mum, but it has helped.
We've had to take it way back to one of the points now, like, but the person couldn't do the relational gesture with that was not easily responded. It's almost like we were doing it for them. So speaking positively about the adult in front of the child was the first sort of step, and then saying things like, oh, whoever the person was saying you did well at this. So giving a compliment through another person that they then could accept, and then we sort of shifted that onto the person's kind of thing. That was a really slow process. And then big bump, like it was going quite well. And some of them, again, we're talking about that shared understanding. For one of our staff members, what really helped them was knowing that the reason, and this I think was pretty much true, the reason that they were being targeted was that the child had more of a connection with them than not. Because actually on the flip side, they were the person that would disclose things to and speak about home and all of that, but they were getting the brunt of it as well. And that really shifted her mindset, which was like, oh, I might be the closest person to him. And then
Just anyway, I've been trying to get back. Thank you so much, Michael. I don't know about others, but I always learn something new working with you. And we were writing stuff down, never mind everybody else. So I'm so glad you let me record you. And yeah, thank you.
you're going to try and be quiet.
Thank you ever so much. We're just going to move on. Camera. So the next bit now, Bridget's going to talk to you about internet safety.
Thank you. Perfect, thank you. Wow, so much to think about today and so much to consider. So this morning in the check-in, we started to speak a little bit about internet, and I just want to build on that. That initial interview with Time Oma in the Context magazine really spoke about the loneliness that parents are experiencing, the lack of parental presence as a result of the internet filling that void. And this really just feeds into that. The distinction between the fact that the children can't relate between what's the real world and what's the digital world. It's all meshed together and it's all merged. Thinking about the fact that within the world, within this new world, children find that magnified, exaggerated, mirrored. There's far more transparency in terms of what we're doing, what we're eating, where we're at. And then, like we spoke about, there's often less transparency because that's all a facade and that's all generated by what we're wanting to project and what we're wanting to put out there. So that really influences things like our thoughts around privacy. You know, I've had to have conversations with my own child who's now got a phone about what this means and what you are putting out there. And if you are sharing pictures and where are you taking those pictures? What does that mean? What are you putting out? What messages are you sending? What kind of profile are you creating? So all of these conversations. And through these discussions, it comes right back down to that idea and that concept of parental anchoring, and that anchor where you're teaching all those fundamentals, and with the result of all those fundamentals, that anchoring is then carried through into this digital platform. And one of the key components is really having an awareness of what is in that digital space. So looking at all of the different apps that are out there. We had great fun yesterday afternoon in the office identifying all of these and thinking about all the different apps that children are accessing at all the different platforms. So we're going to have a quick little competition. Please somewhere jot down the names of these particular apps and let's see how many you can recognize and how familiar you are with it.
So first one's popped up there, number one. Snapchat, TikTok, Insta, Reddit. We belong, similar to Facebook, very popular with the youngsters. They don't like Facebook, by the way. Facebook's demographic is for 30s to 40s. YouTube. What's that? Okay. That's the same as WhatsApp, I think. Yeah. And Discord, one of the most popular new ones. What would you say are the two most popular apps with youngsters in maybe end of primary, beginning of secondary? TikTok, Snapchat, WhatsApp. Interesting to note is that the age limit for WhatsApp and TikTok is 16. So somebody's had to lie in terms of their ages in order for them to register for those particular platforms. So it's thinking about all of these components, thinking about how the internet lowers our presence, all of the risks out there along with this, with the internet. And of course, our natural instinct is reduce, minimize, take away. A very common punishment is, and we hear this in the parent groups, I just took away all the devices, I shut down the Wi-Fi, I just removed it completely. And Haimoma speaks in that article about how that's not successful at all, because we don't usually follow through with that. Eventually we give back the phone or we give back the Wi-Fi password. And B, children need the skills to navigate this, because they might not navigate it right now, but they're going to navigate it at a later stage. So it is about safely persevering and safely navigating this within a family context and within the school context. So how do we keep children safe in terms of what they're doing online? First and foremost, it's having that knowledge, having all that information at our fingertips, and it's being current. You know, there's apps up there that we weren't familiar with. Those are the apps that children are drawn to. Most of the apps that we shared, Reddit, Discord, go into chat rooms. So children have access to a whole room full of strangers where they're sharing all sorts of information. And, you know, it's the safety element behind that. Open and honest conversations, and open and honest conversations about really hard topics. So it is about increasing your presence by addressing those, not shying away from them, thinking about pornography, revenge porn, online grooming. It's about having those conversations at appropriate times. It's about building your own presence in terms of this digital world. So having people to have a look at what's on your child's profile, having those conversations. I found using supporters a wonderful tool in terms of that. You want to strike a balance about how much do you join your child's social media platforms and keep a close eye on them. How much do you give them a little bit of free rein? So sometimes it is about giving them a bit of free rein, but possibly having a family member who can navigate and check in and see what's being shared and how it's being shared. And sometimes somebody else having those kind of conversations is the ideal opportunity. So drawing in that support network. Very often, if we remove all devices and we take everything away, that's when the shield of shame and the element of being secretive and hidden platforms and all of that starts to emerge. So it is about thinking carefully about navigating this. NVR techniques for the digital world, thinking carefully about the digital world and de-escalation, learning about new ways to remove children from devices, the utilization. One of the dads we worked with in a parent group used quite a lot of autopilot statements, forewarned. He also immersed himself in the digital world and used playing some of the games and getting to know some of the games as a relational gesture, but then said, I'm going to play this with you till we get to that level and then we're both going to disengage. So looking at and exploring and setting up ways that you can remove children safely from devices comes across in some of the parent groups as one of the biggest challenges. And it is often a real symmetrical escalation the minute that 5 minutes is up. And because some of the games or some of the activities don't have a definite end, it's very hard to disengage and very hard to remove. So looking at communication models, looking at being open, looking at entering that world. It's my worst thought in the world. I hate gaming and all of that. So it's something that I've had to really explore and look at so that I'm in the know. And it really is one of those relational gestures where you have to dig deep to push through. But it's important because it is meeting them in their space. Raising your own parental presence, your physical presence, by being present on those platforms, by being aware, but your own physical presence in terms of modeling your own behaviors, having those conversations, and really thinking about increasing your own presence so that there is that influence. You know, so much of our presence is down to the fact that you're wanting, if you are physically removed, your child or the young person is still making those choices. So it's what have I got to do to get them to that point? We've got lots of examples around announcements and self-announcements and mini announcements around managing the digital world. As I say, it comes across a lot in parent groups. And one of the key NVR strategies is about that vigilant care. So vigilant care is often that idea where I had a parent, one of my groups, who framed it so nicely to their young person to say, you're not keeping yourself as safe as I'd like at the moment, so I need to increase my presence to keep you safe. So I'm going to do these things in order to restore that safety. So you're not acting safely online at the moment, so these are the measures I have to take in order to restore that level of safety. So I've seen these trends, so these are the things that I'm now going to put in. And I'm not monitoring, I'm not interfering, I'm doing this because I love you for this level of safety. So it is about utilizing your vigilant care in order to restore that level of safety. And it's, you know, it's widely used in terms of internet safety. So I thought if we could have a couple of minutes just to have a little bit of a think in terms of NVR techniques. How could we use NVR techniques which might be, really relevant? What de-escalation strategies would you recommend? You probably also have a lot of conversations with parents around this. So if a parent came in and you were having a discussion around them or around this, what kinds of de-escalation strategies might you suggest? What kinds of relational gestures and some of the other components that we chatted about? So in your little groups as you are seated now, I don't know if Jennifer, if you want to just move over so that Sharon's not on her own, but in your little groups, if you just have a chat about using NVR for internet safety, if we can maybe do that for 5 minutes.
They're all in the 20s. That's the real.
The escalation part we have to at the game. Basically, she understands what you're saying in this right? I understand. Yes. She tries to like it's all I suppose that does not just your whole thing. There's a different scenario with the platform. Is NVR on?
Right, thank you. So this is a very interesting conversation to have because it's a minefield. But if we can just reflect back any of our thoughts. Caitlin, you guys, anything to reflect back in terms of NVR and internet safety?
We were just saying the first step that we find would be getting to know the world of things and understanding what that's like to their eyes. And also, like we were saying, you know, sometimes we can't understand what the drive would be to go on these apps. But once you're on it and you're immersed in it, then maybe you will, like Julie was saying, actually a TikTok experience for all of us makes a difference depending on what we like.
Yeah.
So it depends on what the kids like. And I was just saying, I remember years ago, I've got a younger brother, but he was never allowed on anything I broke it. So I had no idea what GPA was. I knew my probation year and Inverclyde, we went on training. And this boy in my class had been playing that. I knew it was wrong. I didn't really know what he was doing. And they showed images of what the game was actually like. I couldn't believe it. I went back to my teacher. We need to do something like he's playing this game. So I think that would be the step that we really need to know what they're doing. As teachers, as parents.
No, it's out there. It's ever changing. So it's an ongoing journey.
And I think it's very good age. I was saying, I've just got to talk about it. I'm almost in denial because I just think I'm never going to start. Actually, it is important to try and get clear about it. It's feel informed.
I didn't think it properly. I think there's a lot of time, upper school primary, it a lot to do with nature as well. Some of them might not have quite interested in that, but TikTok, the WhatsApp groups going and are kind of talking about these things, then they end up on it. And then you were saying in the fence, I can manage theirs or be involved by having all the messages come, but they couldn't keep up with it.
And then again, in 5 minutes, she said, it just went. And I have all
I don't think this will come to me and say like your child gets quite stressed out because they haven't had their phones. They're in the P6 WhatsApp group. Guys, I wish I was in the P6 WhatsApp group.
No, you don't.
And she said, you know, she can leave it for 2 hours and that's when everything else is on. She can start and 762 messages. She just writes in the message. 762 zero. Takes them back and goes, stop writing invoice. And she was just about her daughter and things that's overwhelming. But she doesn't want to get out of it. And I think it's the girls going for the purification, never mind things and stuff that we can. We're not strong enough to stay away from it because they have to be part of that. But just it's this anxiety of them all, like you're talking about that from point of view. We used to have to Facebook group, it's been an absolute nightmare. And they had to get an active skills coach to had themselves on it, so it wasn't a staff member, just so people could track what was going on. The parents are coming to the school with all these things, almost rude at one point, really horrendous. And it was the parents and their mother and their language as well. We had that as well. We are people phone us about the Facebook page thing. Our part of it is quite get involved in it. We've asked them to look at it. We've asked it to be shut down. we don't do it, it's separate from the school. Because the toxicity of it actually is unbelievable.
I just think of those examples, you know, that's their frame of reference as a parent. Are they able then to teach, you know, internet safety, and are they able to model that and to
Actually, you're saying we're just about thinking about kids and maybe yourselves all the different devices you have in for those people. In fact, if you go through a day and go, I get a real sense of panic. They're not going to sit that. It's become like another life happening. So you need to almost, you know, you think, oh, talk about self-care at the beginning of the day, you know, and tearful. I was just going to say, what's the first thing you do when you get alarm goes off? Take your phone, take your phone. I don't use
Social media. The best part from WhatsApp, and it was actually, I've actually had to go back on it recently because my mum's having an issue with Facebook. Notify them that this was not somebody to set up a kind of a phone account or something like that. And I need to shut it back down because I've only had it on for a week or two, and already I can feel my anxiety level starting to go again because I just find it just takes up so much of my time. I can lose myself in there. Nonsense. It's not even interesting. You know, we get these days you get so many adverts and everything coming up, but in terms of I feel like my well-being is better when I don't have that and I have real communication from people. Like everybody knows I'm not on there, so every now and then I've got friends that will kind of go, I know you're not on Facebook, so I'm sending you a few photos from my recent holiday, or you know, my cousin will go. It was my whatever her head is, I don't know what relation that is to me, but send me baby pictures and stuff like that. So, but then we have a real interaction rather than just thumbs up and scrolling through, and it's actually better for you. And I don't see all the people I used to go to school with that I don't really actually care about.
now we know the truth. Thanks. Yeah, well, I think there's real power in being able to draw those boundaries.
Maybe can't do that.
No,
I think we struggle with it.
Yeah.
I think.
And if you think of the age limits, you know, 13 as an age limit for the bulk of these is still really, really young. You don't have a sense of maturity and the influence on the self-esteem, and so it's about having that increased parental presence so that they have the tools to navigate.
It's something to get back away from that. So in secondary school, there's so many young people who are on phones at class. You know, obviously that's a challenge. With teachers will experience it, we've got moving ourselves, we'll take phone off. Parents won't either. The parents, when you go back to the parent will absolutely not challenge that, and that's a huge issue. Yes, there's so many young people that are addicted to that dopamine hit of every time that ping goes in their phone. It's ridiculous. But
we're talking areas of acceptance from playing in high studies and the transition at the moment, so from different to it's funny in that 6 weeks so many things change. So I can find the second day dinner, so the stuff and into the basket is that every day it's walk to the great thing to do. But then 6 weeks later, you just have your phone all day. You know, it's really
but then you next 7 rooms the same. So that's the kind of thing. And obviously, and the very thing, and many parents will not. In our experience, like probably everyone's secondary school is a case, so many people will not challenge that either. But the child, absolutely.
It's just so funny that that's 6 weeks then just assumes like on the high school now you should have it for all day.
Young people will, you know, put them in as if they're going into a classroom. Sometimes that is the expectation. Many young people will. I know there are also many young people who that is a challenge. You know, that's immediate area for an escalation.
An expectation, because I think that's a great expectation, and you shouldn't back down on that.
And again, it's really frustrating as a parent, you know, the right thing. Or yes, and you say to yourself, that's my chair, but it have a point, you know, and skills did it. You will not. Very, very.
That's getting something. It's just saying I had to do something. Doesn't want to train with a baby respect. Obviously, he never checks his phone, never yeah, because he's big boy. Such a little self-esteem as well. I feel like everything on social media is self-esteem. Like TikTok, and you can film yourself
completely filtered. So
Well, maybe she looked like a teenager.
I think it's for us as adults to take a minute to be like, oh, you have smoothed your face, and whitened your teeth, and bickened your hair, and increased your eye size, and whatever. Like, and I think that was always the thing of like, you could realize well in a video, you know, there's a difference, but now I'm like, well, how will children ever see? How can you tell that that's just not the way people?
Really sorry that when I started my education psychology, which was saying it's year 8, 9,
Anyway, I kind of like we started a Facebook thing, and we were kind of Facebook group, and we're like, oh hello, and hi, I'm so and so, and kind of started and thought, at least I'll know everything. I swore I thought I walked into a different room. I don't recognise anyone talking on this Facebook group for months. But also, I mean, we live in a just absolutely supermodel kind of like thing. So
You want to get sent the best version, and reverse the line.
I think you're up, please. I am. It's very much kind of just building on what you said, and you've picked out quite a few things in your kind of group discussion that kind of very much ties into the last sort of 5 minutes, but I'm just going to recap on a few things. So, like you pointed out before, one of the first steps that we would recommend is that you learn to use whatever technology or apps that your children are using. So that knowledge, build your presence, build your understanding, and it is a relational gesture in itself. It's getting away from that idea that technology is the enemy. Yes, there's lots of bad things about it, but trying to sort of like really understand it from within. And the kids will really appreciate that you're making that effort, and that you're getting interested in what they're interested in, whether you are or not. But like yourself, I've tried to play, what's the one, Fortnite, the one where, oh goodness, I just ran around in circles, get shot, and it's like, just give me your controller away. So, but it's really, but they do actually, but they like the interaction, they like the kind of the fact that you're even asking about it. And it's really important as well, if you kind of, that you have that knowledge, so that if you do need to employ visual care, if you are actually saying to them, look, at the moment I've got some concerns here, and I need to kind of like move from that kind of giving you a full free range, actually moving a little bit closer until I feel like you're able to be safe again, and then I can back off. That you actually know how to navigate that world, because it can be really, really challenging if you're not familiar with the different things. As I said, kind of like trying to kind of remove that bad guy from the equation. So whenever you're talking about technology or challenging around technology, trying to kind of like not kind of come across as that you hate all technology. So maybe reframing. So like when you talk about that kind of start rather than stop request, so rather than off that blooming Xbox, you're always on there kind of thing, which would be the way my daughter refers to her. She's not particularly into gaming, but her brother is, and it's the day of her life. He's always on Minecraft, he's always on the So, but it's very much kind of like trying to kind of like attract them towards what you do, what you do, rather than they kind of see me coming across like you're really down on the games and stuff like that. Using mini announcements can be quite a useful strategy, and really kind of like persisting with your kind of approach, and kind of using the right terminology, obviously, things that are not going to wind you. There's some kind of evidence out there that making a family agreement can be helpful. So having a kind of like general rules that like we would in school would be the same sort of thing. That whole like, our expectation is that you leave your phones at the front of class when you come in. Or similarly, if you're working with parents and you're trying to advise them, you know, sometimes having an agreement about how and when you can use the internet, but making sure that there's kind of times where you have that time to kind of like connect away from students, can be really useful. And sometimes a bit like when we do an announcement and you include that little bit of a self-announcement in that, it's like, look, I'm aware that the phone is really important to you, keeping up with your friends is really important, it is for me too, but sometimes I feel like we both spend too much time on our phones, and that we both need to kind of like, so you're kind of acknowledging the fact that this is maybe more of a, it's not just a problem for the young person, it's stuff that we do as well. So yeah, just having those kind of expectations set out clearly in order for them to be safe. Just to kind of let you know, if you weren't already aware, that gaming and social media is now a sort of diagnosable addiction kind of like thing that can actually people could actually be the complication of sort of having a gaming disorder. A bit of a kind of description there. And that's when it gets to the level where there's kind of it's causing significant distress or impairment to normal sort of functioning, whether it be family education. And there's obviously growing trends and pattern of these behaviours where it is an actual like proper addiction type thing, and just be aware of the impact that that can have, and about how sometimes it can be kind of like either continuous or it can be just like for small episodes and things be a recurring thing. But yeah, how can NVR help? Well, it's been shown to be kind of like really helpful in situations where addictions are present of all sorts, and where children are having signs of mental health issues. So again, it's like thinking about are the relational gestures, announcements, how can we kind of encourage that connection and kind of influence their kind of behaviour, and how can we kind of generally raise our presence to be more of a kind of influential factor in those kind of decision making around that, providing that sort of attractive alternatives and time kind of away from screens. And setting that out in a really clear way as part of your plan, your strategic planning that you're doing. This is kind of like something that I think Bridget referred to earlier, in terms of there's been this sort of research so that when human beings, not only children, are absorbed in kind of like a screen, whether it be a film or a computer game, we're actually kind of entering into another world in that way. It's kind of provides this sort of hypnotic kind of sensation in our brains and puts us into this state of flow. And it really kind of like, that's when we see kids that just sort of like, I don't know if any of you do live in, you know, in terms of levels of involvement and things like that, they're a 10 on the scale in terms of a bomb could go off behind them, but they're absolutely immersed in this world. They may be physically in the room with you, but their head is elsewhere. And trying to pull them away from that can be really, really difficult, because they really don't want to do anything else in that moment. And that's because all of the chemicals that are being transmitted are really kind of positive and keep giving them that kind of dopamine hit. And then that when that screen is taken away from them quite suddenly, it can cause a massive drop in that, and it can be really quite distressing and kind of potentially kind of cause a massive escalation. So we do quite often kind of, when that comes up in a parent group, we do quite often talk to parents about how challenging that can be, and how trying to kind of, as part of the understanding of the hidden needs behind the behaviour, understand that this is a real sensation that kind of the children are feeling. It's not just, you know, to you, you're just watching them playing a game and you kind of said to them, you know, you've got 2 minutes, your dinner's ready, you need to be off of there or whatever, or put that down now or whatever. It really is a kind of quite a distressing thing to throw them away. So as Bridget mentioned earlier, we kind of encourage parents to kind of thinking about building a bridge towards that transition if it's becoming a big problem. So while you're kind of, there's all the kind of the other tools like striking while the iron's cold, the rule of one and any announcements, but also kind of like entering into that child's world just before you're kind of, so say you're kind of, if it was a parent would be saying, well, you're cooking dinner kind of thing, you know that it's like 10 minutes to go, sort of, you can kind of like go over and start to kind of like come alongside the child and kind of enter into their kind of their game and kind of ask questions. Who's that character that you've got? Oh, are you winning? What's happening? Oh, and sort of like you're kind of gradually, they're still in the game, but they're able to kind of like, they're kind of like starting to have half a foot back in the real world. So they're still in the game, and it kind of provides that kind of bridge to be able to have that kind of conversation where you can actually join them in the game for a few minutes and then kind of say to them, right, okay, by the way, I've just got to go and get the dinner now because that's like 5 minutes to go, so this is your warning. And it kind of like brings it more of a gentle kind of like bridge back into the real world, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's just about persisting. So children do love it when you take an interest in their world, even if you get it all wrong and you know it wrong. Whereas they'll still appreciate that you're making an effort. And it's kind of, I suppose, what we're saying about that, reducing that dopamine drop so that it's more of a gradual kind of process, and where you can start to kind of then get in and kind of communicate with them in a less sort of threatening way to where they are in their heads at that particular moment in time. And then this was just a slide to signpost you to some of the things that we discussed this morning in terms of the blog and the Pam Harm. That's a bit of a tricky one. Is that one that you use, Bridget, the same?
Then we step forward some on. Gives people these chat rooms and gives them alternatives in the car, and wanting to self-harm gives them some tools, and sometimes just a pause or a break, but lots of support within that, and quite a lot of support within things.
And obviously the assist or the safe talk training is something that kind of like is just need to be aware of. Obviously there's the REN 10 website, which has the shout helpline, things like Fiona mentioned that the other week. And there's a professional section on there where the password is REN 10. Is that right? Yeah. So yeah, so is there any kind of questions before we have lunch? And we're probably starting. You know, Peter's belly's been rumbling. Can you hear that? Yes. But is there any questions about the internet safety stuff before we go to lunch? Is that kind of idea of the bridge building and kind of entering into the world to try and bring them back? Does that kind of make sense? I think parents can find that. And it's hard because you're busy and, you know, sometimes you just, everything's like fast paced and you snap something out without thinking about it. But it can be a help. So for lunch and then say my phone. Yes, I know. Really, it's not what the